Side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? I really want to sing that song right now because I just listened to it, but I probably shouldn't because I don't want what's his name, Pete Seeger. I don't want his ghost. I don't know if he's dead. I assume so. To come and kill me. Come and kill me monetarily. But which side are you on? So, Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast, you'll be happy to know we're not reading Pride and Prejudice today. Mr. Beast. I know how much you love Jane Austen because you're a huge sexist and you hate females, Mr. Beast. Uh, just kidding. I know you're not a huge sexist who hates females, Mr. Beast. And just to be clear, I mean, that's not slander. I'm talking to Mr. Beast here in my chat. This person right here in my chat, whose name is Mr. Beast. Just to be very clear, uh, you know what really annoyed me today? I was taking a walk just now in the woods, and you're reading Name of the Wind. No, that came out in like 2003. That let's see, that's still a little bit off from becoming public domain. Uh, I'll read Name of the Wind to you, just like at home, Mr. Beast. I'll make a home call. But I was taking a walk. Yeah, we're still like 100 years from that ever being readable on this stream, so probably not. But I don't know. Maybe in the future I'll find out that I was being way too touchy about all this copyright stuff, and maybe I was wrong. Look at this hairline. Um, I was being way too touchy about all this copyright stuff. Maybe in the future uh, it'll be more relaxed on the stream here, and I'll be able to read more things. But from what I can tell, I did look into it a little bit on the chat on the sewing stream. Don't ask. Um, and from what I can tell, the way I'm doing it is the safest legal move. I don't know why people can play video games or react to other people's videos, and just that's just fine. I don't know why that's fine. What's different? I mean, I know that they're saying, "Oh, they're transforming it. They're playing it. It's being transformed or whatever." It's not an experience like a book. It's the same every time. I guess. I mean, I'm doing voices. So I was taking a walk. Let me jump back here. I was taking a walk and I had to pee. I had to urinate. It annoyed me that I couldn't just that I can't just that I have to go and hide. That I have to go and find a little like hideaway. Like everybody does it. It happens. You can't stop it. It happens. I think if you make, I was, you're very nervous about it because it's a public place. I'm not going to say if I did it or not there because public urination. I definitely didn't pee in public. Um, it just annoys me. I think if you make a genuine effort to hide yourself and then by mistake you're caught, like I don't think you should be able to press charges on somebody if you accidentally stumble on them doing something that everybody does all the time, every day, like 20 times a day, like 10 times a day, whatever, however many. I never really counted. 7 to 10, 7 to 12 times a day, whatever, however many times a day. And it just annoys me that these natural bodily functions. I get it. You don't just want people peeing all over the place. and kids or whatever too are very. Everybody's got to think of the children, but anyway, it annoys me that I have to go under a bridge like a troll. But it's not going to kill. Okay, never mind. Whatever. Today we're going to be reading some H.G. Wells, recommended by a user on YouTube. My YouTube at Coldstone Readery. Uh, recommended by user. Let's see if I can still access my community posts. I can. Uh, well, apparently it wasn't on that community post I thought it was on. At some point, user whatever user and viewer MF uh, Doom recommended some H.G. Wells stories. Got this beautiful edition of H.G. Wells. Stars on the back. Now, what I mean to say is that I have the text of H.G. Wells. It doesn't matter what edition it is. There's no. It's timeless. There's no. I gotta avoid copyright. It's not any edition. This is nebulous. These words are coming to me from the void. Um, we're gonna read The Time Machine. Now you're probably gonna. Well, I'd be curious to know what you think of this, Mr. Beast. I'm not gonna stay on here for too long tonight. Honestly, I'll probably go for like an hour, a little over an hour, maybe, because I still have to eat dinner. I'm getting hungry, but I wanted to get a stream out tonight because I wanted to stream tonight. I wanted to read some of this. I wanted to get started, and I'll probably read more tomorrow, maybe even earlier in the day tomorrow. But I wanted to get started reading The Time Machine. I've never read The Time Machine. The only Wells I've read is War of the Worlds, which I also want to read on here at some point. I want to read all of these stories in this collection and maybe more. Who knows if I really like these? I like War of the Worlds well enough. I thought it was good. Good for an October read. This collection and his most famous works, I believe all of these are public domain now. I know The Time Machine is, and War of the Worlds is. Um, this one includes The Time Machine, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, The First Men in the Moon, and The Food of the Gods, all starting with the word the. Well, The Time Machine, from what I'm looking at, it already has a lot of hard words in it. So I don't know that many words. I'm not that smart. My brain don't work too good. So I'm gonna have to look up some of these words, but I think I'm gonna underline words as we go, and then at the end I'll mostly talk about it. But at the beginning here, I might. um, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Chapter 1. The time traveler, for so it will be convenient to speak of him, was expounding a recondite matter to us. Recondite means obscure. I had to look that up. His gray eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burned brightly, and the soft radiance of the incandescent lights in the lilies of silver caught the bubbles that flashed and passed in our glasses. Our chairs, being his patents, embraced and caressed us rather than submit to be sat upon, and there was that luxurious after dinner atmosphere when thought roams gracefully free of the trammels of precision. Trammels. I'm going to underline that. I don't know it. He put it to us in this way, marking the points with a lean forefinger as we sat and lazily admired his earnestness over this new paradox as we thought it, and his fecundity. Now, Mr. Beast, if you're here, can you tell me, have you ever heard the word fecundity? How am I expected to know the word fecundity? Now, I'm genuinely curious if you've heard it, though, Mr. Beast. Have you heard the word fecundity before? Do you know what it means? And don't look it up. I'm not trying to get impressed. You're not going to impress me if you know the word. I'm genuinely curious, Mr. Beast, if you know the word fecundity. Fecundity. If you can hear me, Mr. Beast. Because I've been doing a little research on fecundity, and what it means is the ability to produce an abundance of offspring or new growth. It's another word for fertility, a kind of, as far as I can tell, but in more like in a group of people, like the fecundity of sea lions or something, rather than an individual. Now, fecundity, okay? Never heard of this word before in my life. But what surprised me is I saw this chart here when I looked it up, and the golden age of fecundity was like the late 80s, early 90s. So, Mr. Beast, you being alive at that time, I would think maybe you heard the word fecundity a lot. I mean, this is a usage in books, obviously, not in everyday speech, because that would be impossible to measure. But 1987 was the peak of fecundity, apparently. 1987 and 88. In fecundity. Now, there's even a book just called Fecundity with an exclamation mark here. Fecundity versus civilization. Uncontrolled breeding. I'm actually curious about this one. 1917. Is this an early antinatalist uncontrolled breeding or fecundity versus civilization? Oops. A contribution to the study of overpopulation as the cause of war and the chief obstacle to the emancipation of women by Charles K. Ogden. Interesting. Let's just read this instead. Preface. Okay, wait a second. I think my ADHD is showing here. Anyway, fecundity just threw me for a loop because apparently it's like the most common word of all time. What threw me off about it was look at these numbers, okay? 0.000135, okay? 000, 3 zeros after the decimal point. Now, this is what Google gave me as an example, okay? Google gave me an example of other. Whoa! I was fiddling with something and then whatever. They gave me Sherlock Holmes. They gave me Sherlock Holmes, which to me blew my mind that in 1985 or let's say 1987, like it was 1987, 0.000616, four zeros after the decimal point for Sherlock Holmes. I mean, nowadays it's more common to say Sherlock Holmes, but I don't even think it's more common than fecundity was at its peak. What's up with okay? And also Sherlock Holmes most famous character of all time is like most famous detective of all time, at least. Not the most famous character, really. That was an exaggeration for comedic effect. But fecundity, really, is the more popular word than Sherlock Holmes. Now, Albert Einstein. Oops. Einstein. Einstein! Also, just completely wrong. Uh, Whatever. That was another one. It was smaller than fecundity. I saw when I was looking through all this. How is fecundity the most popular word of all time? I don't understand. Anyway, the fecundity of this conversation is worn thin, so I'm going to keep reading. You must follow me carefully. I shall have to controvert one or two ideas that are almost universally accepted, like the one that says that a good man who never mind. Uh, the geometry, for instance, they taught you at school is founded on a misconception. Is not that rather a large thing to expect us to begin upon? Said Philby, an argumentative person with red hair. I do not mean to ask you to accept anything without reasonable ground for it. You will soon admit as much as I need from you. You know, of course, that a mathematical line, a line of thickness nil, has no real existence. They taught you that? Neither has a mathematical plane. These things are mere abstractions. That is all right, said the psychologist. Nor, having any length, breadth, and thickness, can a cube have a real existence. There I object, said Philby. Of course a solid body may exist. All real things. So most people think, but wait a moment. Can an instantaneous cube exist? Don't follow you, said Philby. Can a cube that does not last for any time at all have a real existence? Philby became pensive. Clearly, the time traveler proceeded, any real body must have extension in four directions. It must have length, breadth, thickness, and duration. But through a natural infirmary of the flesh, which I will explain you in a moment, we incline to overlook this fact. There are really four dimensions, three which we call the three planes of space, and a fourth, time. There is, however, a tendency to draw an unreal distinction between the former three directions and the latter, because it happens that our consciousness moves indeterminately in one direction along the latter from the beginning to the end of our lives. That, said a very young man, making spasmodic efforts to relight his cigar over the lamp, that, very clear indeed. Now, it is very remarkable that this is so extensively overlooked, continued the time traveler, with a slight accession of cheerfulness. Really, this is what is meant by the fourth dimension, though some people who talk about the fourth dimension do not know they mean it. It is only another way of looking at time. There is no difference between time and any of these three dimensions of space, except that our consciousness moves along it. But some foolish people have got hold of the wrong side of that idea. You have all heard what they have to say about this fourth dimension. I have not, said the provincial mayor. It is simply this, that space, as our mathematics have it, is spoken of as having three dimensions, which one may call length, breadth, and thickness. It is always definable by reference to three planes, each at right angles to the others. But some philosophical people have been asking why three dimensions particularly. Why not another direction at right angles to the other three? And have even tried to construct a fourth dimension geometry. Professor Simon Newcomb was expounding this to the New York Mathematical Society only a month or so ago. You know how, on a flat surface, which has only two dimensions, we can represent a figure of a three-dimensional shape? And similarly, they think that by models of three dimensions, they could represent one of four, if they could master the perspective of the thing. See? I think so, murmured the provincial mayor, knitting his brows. He lapsed into an introspective state, his lips moving as one who repeats mystic words. Yes, I think I see it now, he said after some time, brightening in the quite transitory manner. Well, I do not mind telling you I have been at work upon this geometry of four dimensions for some time. Some of my results are curious. For instance, here is a portrait of a man at 80 years old, another at 15, another at 17, another at 23, and so on. All these are evidently sections, as it were, three-dimensional representations of his four-dimensioned being, which is a fixed and unalterable thing. Scientific people, proceeded the time traveler, after a pause required for the proper assimilation of this, know very well that time is only a kind of space. Here is a popular scientific diagram, a weather record. This line I trace with my finger shows the movement of the barometer. Yesterday it was so high, yesterday night it fell, then this morning it rose again, and so gently upward to here. Surely the mercury did not trace this line in any of the dimensions of space generally recognized, but certainly it traced such a line, and that line, therefore, we must conclude was along the time dimension. But, said the medical man, staring hard at a coal in the fire, if time is really only a fourth dimension of space, why is it, and why has it always been, regarded as something different? And why cannot we move in time as we move about in the other dimensions of space? The time traveler said, Are you sure we can move freely in space? Right and left we can go, backwards and forwards freely enough, and men always have done so. I admit we move freely in two dimensions, but how about up and down? Gravitation limits us there. Not exactly, said the medical man. There are balloons. But before the balloons, save for spasmodic jumping and the inequalities of the surface, man had no freedom of vertical movement. Still, they could move a little up and down, said the medical man. Easier, far easier down than up. And you cannot move at all in time. You cannot get away from the present moment. My dear sir, that is just where you are wrong. This is just where the whole world has gone wrong. We are always getting away from the present moment. Our mental existences, which are immaterial and have no dimensions, are passing along the time dimension with a uniform velocity from the cradle to the grave, just as we should travel down if we begin our existence 50 miles above the earth's surface. But the general difficulty with this is this, interrupted the psychologist. You can move about in all directions of space, but you cannot move about in time. This is the germ of my great discovery. But you are wrong to say that we cannot move about in time. For instance, if I am recalling an incident very vividly, I go back to the instant of its occurrence. I become absent minded, as you say. I jump back for a moment. Of course, we have no means of staying back for any length of time, any more than a savage or an animal has of staying 6 feet above the ground. But a civilized man is better off than the savage in this respect. He can go up against gravitation in a balloon, and why should he not hope that ultimately he may be able to stop or accelerate his drift along the time dimension, or even turn about and travel the other way? "Oh, this," began Philby, "is all—" "Why not?" said the time traveler. "It's against reason." "What reason?" said the time traveler. "You can show black as white by argument," said Philby, "but you will never convince me." "Possibly not," said the time traveler, "but now you begin to see the object of my investigations into the geometry of 4 dimensions. Long ago I had a vague inkling of a machine." "To travel through time!" exclaimed the very young man. "That shall travel indifferently in any direction of space and time, as the driver determines." Philby contented himself with laughter. "But I have experimental verification," said the time traveler. "It would be remarkable for the It would be remarkably convenient for the historian," the psychologist suggested. "One might travel back and verify the accepted account of the Battle of Hastings, for instance." "Don't you think you would attract attention?" "Don't you think you would attract attention?" said the medical man. "Our ancestors had no great tolerance for anachronisms." "One might get one's Greek from the very lips of Homer and Plato," the very young man thought. "In which case they would certainly plough you for the little go. The German scholars have improved." Well, wait a minute. "In which case they would certainly plough you for the little go." What is the little go? "The German scholars have improved Greek so much." "Then there is the future," said the very young man. "Just think! One might invest all one's money, leave it to accumulate at interest, and hurry on ahead." "To discover a society," said I. Apparently there's an I. "Erected on a strictly communistic basis." H.G. Wells was a hardcore communist. "Of all the wild, extravagant theories," began the psychologist. "Yes, so it seems to me, and so I never talked of it until—" "Experimental verification!" cried I. "You are going to verify that?" "The experiment!" cried Philby, who was getting brain-weary. "Let's see your experiment anyhow," said the psychologist, "though it's all humbug, you know." The time traveler smiled round at us, then, still smiling faintly, and with his hands deep in his trousers pockets— excuse me. He walked slowly out of the room, and we heard his slippers shuffling down the long passage to his laboratory. The psychologist looked at us. "I wonder what he's got." "Some sleight of hand trick or other," said the medical man, and Philby tried to tell us about a conjurer he had seen in Burlesum. But before he had finished his preface, the time traveler came back, and Philby's anecdote collapsed. The thing the time traveler held in his hand was a glittering metallic framework, scarcely larger than a small clock, and very delicately made. There was ivory in it, and some transparent crystalline substance, and now I must be explicit, for this that follows, unless his explanation is to be accepted, is an absolutely unaccountable thing. He took one of the small octagonal tables that were scattered about the room, and set it in front of the fire. With 2 legs on the hearthrug, on this table he placed the mechanism. Then he drew up a chair and sat down. The only other object on the table was a small shaded lamp, the bright light of which fell upon the model. There were also perhaps a dozen candles about, two in brass candlesticks upon the mantel, and several in sconces, so that the room was brightly illuminated. I sat in a low armchair nearest the fire, and I drew this forward so as to be almost between the time traveler and the fireplace. Philby sat behind him, looking over his shoulder. The medical man and the provincial mayor watched him in profile from the right, the psychologist from the left. The very young man stood behind the psychologist. We were all on the alert. It appears incredible to me that any kind of trick, however subtly conceived and however adroitly done, could have been played upon us under these conditions. The time traveler looked at us and then at the mechanism. "Well," said the psychologist. "This little affair," said the time traveler, resting his elbows upon the table and pressing his hands together above the apparatus, "is only a model. It is my plan for a machine to travel through time. You will notice that it looks singularly askew. Let me try that again. You will notice that it looks singularly askew, and that there is an odd twinkling appearance about this bar, as though it was in some way unreal." He pointed to the part with his finger. "Also, here is one little white lever, and here is another." The medical man got up out of his chair and peered into the thing. "It's beautifully made," he said. "It took 2 years to make," retorted the time traveler. Then, when we all imitated the action of the medical man, he said, "Now I want you clearly to understand that this lever, being pressed upon, sends the machine gliding into the future, and this other reverses the motion. This saddle represents the seat of a time traveler. Presently I am going to press the lever, and off the machine will go. It will vanish, pass into future time, and disappear. Have a good look at the thing. Look at the table, too, and satisfy yourself that there is no trickery. I don't want to waste this model, and then be told I'm a quack." There was a minute's pause, perhaps. The psychologist seemed about to speak to me, but changed his mind. Then the time traveler put forth his finger towards the lever. "No," he said suddenly, "lend me your hand." And turning to the psychologist, he took that individual's hand in his own and told him to put out his forefinger. So that it was the psychologist himself who sent forth the model time machine on its interminable voyage. We all saw the lever turn. I am absolutely certain there was no trickery. There was a breath of wind, and the lamp flame jumped. One of the candles on the mantel was blown out, and the little time machine suddenly swung round, became indistinct, was seen as a ghost for a second perhaps, as an eddy of faintly glittering brass and ivory, and it was gone, vanished. Save for the lamp, the table was bare. Everyone was silent for a minute. Then Philby said he was damned. The psychologist recovered from his stupor, and suddenly looked under the table. At that the time traveler laughed cheerfully. "Well," he said, with a reminiscence of the psychologist. Then, getting up, he went to the tobacco jar on the mantel, and with his back to us began to fill his pipe. We stared at each other. Look here," said the medical man. "Are you in earnest about this? Do you seriously believe that the machine has traveled into time?" "Certainly," said the time traveler, stooping to light a spill at the fire. Then he turned, lighting his pipe, to look at the psychologist's face. The psychologist, to show that he was not unhinged, helped himself to a cigar and tried to light it uncut. "What is more, I have a big machine nearly finished in there." He indicated the laboratory. "And when this is put together, I mean to have a journey on my own account." "You mean to say that the machine has traveled into the future?" "Into the future or the past. I don't for certain know which." After an interval, the psychologist had an inspiration. It must have gone into the past, if it has gone anywhere, he said. Why? Said the time traveler. Because I presume that it has not moved in space, and if it traveled into the future, it would still be here all this time, since it must have traveled through this time. But, I said, if it traveled into the past, it would have been visible when we came first into this room, and last Thursday when we were here, and the Thursday before, and so forth. Serious objections, remarked the provincial mayor with an air of impartiality, turning toward the time traveler. Not a bit, said the time traveler, and to the psychologist, you think you can you can explain that? You think you can explain that? It's presentation below the threshold, you know, diluted presentation. Of course, said the psychologist, and reassured us. It's a simple point of psychology. I should have thought of it. It's plain enough. It helps the paradox delightfully. We cannot see it, nor can we appreciate this machine, any more than we can the spoke of a wheel spinning, or a bullet flying through the air. If it is traveling through time 50 times or 100 times faster than we are, if it gets through a minute while we get through a second, the impression it creates will of course be only 1/50th or 1/100th of what it would make if it were not traveling in time. That's plain enough. He passed his hand through the space in which the machine had been. You see? He said, laughing. We sat and stared at the vacant table for a minute or so. Then the time traveler asked us what we thought of it all. Sounds plausible enough tonight, said the medical man, but wait until tomorrow. Wait for the common sense of the morning. Would you like to see the time machine itself? Asked the time traveler, and therewith, taking the lamp in his hand, he led the way down the long, draughty corridor of his to his laboratory. Uh, I remember vividly the flickering light, his queer, broad head in silhouette, the dance of the shadows, how we all followed him, puzzled but incredulous, and how there in the laboratory we beheld a larger edition of the little mechanism which we had seen vanish from before our eyes. Parts were of nickel, parts of ivory, parts had certainly been filed or sawn out of rock crystal. The thing was generally complete, but the twisted crystalline bars lay unfinished upon the bench beside some sheets of drawings, and I took one up for a better look at it. Quartz it seemed to be. Look here, said the medical man. Are you perfectly serious? Or is this a trick, like that ghost you showed us last Christmas? Upon that machine, said the time traveler, holding the lamp aloft, I intend to explore time. Is that plain? I was never more serious in my life. None of us quite knew how to take it. I caught Philby's eye over the shoulder of the medical man, and he winked at me solemnly. End of chapter 1. Hey, Dangles. Welcome to the time machine. I want to see how many chapters there are throughout this whole story. Let's see. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Um, 12 and an epilogue. Well, I'm not planning on going very long tonight, Dangles. Just a couple more chapters here. They're not very long. But I'm not going to go too long tonight. But there'll be more tomorrow, probably. but probably nothing this Sunday, as I will be enjoying the Super Bowl. Okay, Chapter 2. I think that at that time none of us quite believed in the time machine. The fact is, the time traveler was one of those men who are too clever to be believed. You never felt that you saw all around him. You always suspected some subtle reserve, some ingenuity in ambush behind his lucid frankness. Had Philby shown the model and explained the matter in the time machine's words, we should have shown him far less skepticism, for we should have perceived his motives. A pork butcher could understand Philby, but the time traveler had more than a touch of whim among his elements, and we distrusted him. Sounds like me. Things that would have made the frame of a less clever man seemed less seemed things that would have made the frame of a less clever man seemed tricks in his hands. It is a mistake to do things too easily. The serious people who took him seriously never felt quite sure of his deportment. They were somehow aware of that trusting their reputations for judgment with him was like furnishing a nursery with eggshell china. So I don't think any of us said very much about the time traveling in the interval between that Thursday and the next, though its odd potentialities ran no doubt in most of our minds. Its plausibility, that that is, its practical incredibleness, the curious possibilities of anachronism and of utter confusion it suggested. For my own part, I was particularly preoccupied with the trick of the model, that I remember discussing with the medical man whom I met on Friday at Liena. Leon? Linnean. He said he had seen a similar thing in Tubingen, Tub, Tübingen, Tübingen, and laid considerable stress on the blowing out of the candle, but how the trick was done he could not explain. The next Thursday I went again to Richmond. I suppose I was one of the time traveler's most constant guests, and arriving late, found 4 or 5 men already assembled in his drawing room. The medical man was standing before the fire with a sheet of paper in the one hand and his watch in the other. I looked round for the time traveler, and "It's 7:30 now," said the medical man. "I suppose we'd better have dinner." "Where's—" said I, naming our host. "You've just come. It's rather odd. He's unavoidably detained. He asks me to He asks me in this note to lead off with dinner at 7 if he's not back. Says he'll explain when he comes." "It seems a pity to let the dinner spoil," said the editor of a well-known daily paper, and thereupon the doctor rang the bell. The psychologist was the only person besides the doctor and myself who had attended the previous dinner. The other men were blank, the editor aforementioned, a certain journalist, and another, a quiet, shy man with a beard, whom I didn't know, and who, as far as my observation went, never opened his mouth all the evening. There was some speculation at the dinner table about the time traveler's absence. I suggested time traveling in a half jocular spirit. The editor wanted that explained to him, and the psychologist volunteered a wooden account of the ingenious paradox and trick we had witnessed that day week. He was in the midst of his exposition when the door from the corridor opened slowly and without noise. I was facing the door and saw it first. "Hullo!" I said. "At last!" And the door opened wider, and the time traveler stood before us. I gave a cry of surprise. "Good heavens, man, what's the matter?" cried the medical man, who saw him next, and whose tableful turned towards the door. And the whole tableful turned towards the door. He was in an amazing plight. His coat was dusty and dirty, and smeared with green down the sleeves, his hair disordered, and, as it seemed to me, grayer, either with dust and dirt, or because its colour had actually faded. His face was ghastly pale, his chin had a brown cut on it, cut half healed. His expression was haggard and drawn, as by intense suffering. For a moment he hesitated in the doorway, as if he had been dazzled by the light. Then he came into the room. He walked with just such a limp as I have seen in footsore tramps. We stared at him in silence, expecting him to speak. He said not a word, but came painfully to the table, and made a motion towards the wine. The editor filled a glass of champagne, and pushed it towards him. He drained it, and it seemed to do him good, for he looked round the table, and the ghost of his old smile flickered across his face. "What on earth have you been up to, man?" said the doctor. The time traveler did not seem to hear. "Don't let me disturb you," he said, with a certain faltering articulation. "I'm all right." He stopped, held out his glass for more, and took it off at a draught. "That's good," he said. His eyes grew brighter, and a faint colour came into his cheeks. His glance flickered over our faces with a certain dull approval, and then went round the warm and comfortable room. And then he spoke again, still, as it were, feeling his way among his words. "I'm going to wash and dress, and then I'll come down and explain things. Save me some of that mutton. I'm starving for a bit of meat." He looked across at the editor, who was a rare visitor, and hoped he was all right. The editor began a question. "Tell you presently," said the time traveler. "I'm funny. Be all right in a minute." I'm funny. This guy really is like me if I was a super genius, so guess like me. He put down his glass and walked towards the staircase door. Again I remarked his lameness and the soft padding sound of his footfall, and standing up in my place I saw his feet as he went out. He had nothing on them but a pair of tattered, blood-stained socks. Then the door closed upon him. I had half a mind to follow, till I remembered how he detested any fuss about himself. For a minute, perhaps, my mind was wool gathering. Then, "Remarkable behavior of an eminent scientist," I heard the editor say, thinking, after his wont, in headlines. And this brought my attention back to the bright dinner table. "What's the game?" said the journalist. "Has he been doing the amateur cadger?" Cadger? I don't follow. I met the eye of the psychologist and read my own interpretation in his face. I thought of the time traveler limping painfully upstairs. I don't think anyone else had noticed his lameness. The first to recover completely from this surprise was the medical man, who rang the bell. The time traveler hated to have servants waiting at dinner for a hot plate. At that, the editor turned to his knife and fork with a grunt, and the silent man followed suit. The dinner was resumed. Conversation was exclamatory for a little while, with gaps of wonderment, and then the editor got fervent in his curiosity. "Does our friend eke out his modest income with a crossing? Or has he his Nebuchadnezzar phases?" he inquired. "I feel assured it's this business of the time machine," I said, and took up the psychologist's account of our previous meeting. The new guests were frankly incredulous. The editor raised objections. What was this time traveling? A man couldn't cover himself with dust by rolling in a paradox, could he? And then, as the idea came home to him, he resorted to caricature. He resorted to caricature. Hadn't they any clothes brushed in the future? Oh, sorry. Hadn't they any clothes brushes in the future? The journalist, too, would not believe at any price, and joined the editor in the easy work of heaping ridicule on the whole thing. They were both the new kind of journalist, very joyous, irreverent young men. Our special correspondence in the day after tomorrow reports, the journalist was saying, or rather shouting, when the time traveler came back. He was dressed in ordinary evening clothes, and nothing save his haggard look remained of the change that had startled me. I say, said the editor hilariously, these chaps here say you have been travelling into the middle of next week. Tell us all about the little Rosebery, will you? What will you take for the lot? The time traveler came to the place reserved for him without a word. He smiled quietly in his old way. Where's my mutton? He said. What a treat it is to stick a fork into meat again. Story! Cried the editor. Story be damned, said the time traveler. I want something to eat. I won't say a word till I get some peptone into my arteries. Thanks. And the salt. One word, said I. Have you been time traveling? Yes, said the time traveler, with his mouth full, nodding his head. I love this character. I'd give a shilling a line for a verbatim note, said the editor. The time traveler pushed his glass towards the silent man, and rang it with his fingernail, at which the silent man, who had been staring at his face, started convulsively, and poured him wine. The rest of the dinner was uncomfortable. For my own part, sudden questions kept rising to my lips, and I dare say it was the same with the others. The journalist tried to relieve the tension by telling anecdotes of Hetty Potter. The time traveler devoted his attention to his dinner, displayed the appetite of a tramp. The medical man smoked a cigarette, and watched the time traveler through his eyelashes. The silent man seemed even more clumsy than usual, and drank champagne with regularity and determination out of sheer nervousness. At last the time traveler pushed his plate away and looked around us. I suppose I must apologize, he said. I was simply starving. I've had a most amazing time. He reached out his hand for a cigar and cut the end. But come into the smoking room. It's too long a story to tell over greasy plates. And ringing the bell in passing, he led the way into the adjoining room. You have told Blank and Dash and Chose about the machine? Chose, he said to me, leaning back in his easy chair and naming the three new guests. But the thing's a mere paradox, said the editor. I can't argue tonight. I don't mind telling you the story, but I can't argue. I will, he went on, tell you the story of what has happened to me, if you like, but you must refrain from interruptions. I want to tell it badly. Most of it will sound like lying. So be it. It's true, every word of it. All the same. I was in my laboratory at 4 o'clock, and since then I've lived 8 days, such days as no human being ever lived before. I'm nearly worn out, but I shan't sleep till I've told this thing over to you. Then I shall go to bed. But no interruptions. Is it agreed? Agreed, said the editor, and the rest of us echoed agreed. And with that the time traveler began his story, as I have set it forth. He sat back in his chair at first, and spoke like a weary man. Afterwards he got more animated. In writing it down, I feel with only too much keenness the inadequacy of pen and ink, and above all my own inadequacy, to express its quality. You read, I will suppose, attentively enough, but you cannot see the speaker's white, sincere face in the bright circle of the little lamp, nor hear the intonation of his voice. You cannot know how this expression followed the turns of his story. Most of us hearers were in shadow, for the candles in the smoking room had not been lighted, and only the face of the journalist and the legs of the silent man from the knees downward were illuminated. At first we glanced now and again at each other. After a time we ceased to do that, and looked only at the time traveler's face. End of chapter 2. I'm going to take a moment here to put on some pajama pants. I still got like a belt and pants on. And I'm going to take a moment to grab some water too, probably. So let's take 5 here. I know it's just me and you, Dangles, I think. But I'm going to take a moment. Just sit right there to stretch, and then I'll read another chapter. We'll begin the actual time traveler's story. Be right back. Okay, Mr. Beast 2. Fine. You're here too, Beast. I'm back. And look who's here. Kitty. Kitty. Hmm. You're a cutie, kitty. Okay. Bye bye, kitty. Now, what do we think so far, Mr. Beast? Are you enjoying the story? I like the character a lot, the time traveler. I want to be like the time traveler one day. Just a wacky old guy who makes crazy inventions. His hair's it's not as raw as it was. He's kind of letting it grow back, I think, again. Doesn't seem as dry. I tried rubbing coconut oil on the part of his skin that seemed dry, but supposedly that helps. Um, Seems like it did. I prefer this book being read by you. Have you read it before, Mr. Beast? Well, another chapter or two tonight. Not too much longer. Well, you've read it before. Well, I've never read it before, and I'm quite enjoying it so far. I find this character to be an entertaining lead. I hope to see what he has to do. Better than the lead of War of the Worlds, at least. It was pretty boring. Um, we'll see how I feel at the end of this chapter 3 here. Um, chapter 3. Now, this is all from the Time Traveler, so I suppose I'll do his voice. I told some of you last Thursday of the principles of the time machine and showed you the actual thing itself, incomplete in the workshop. There is now a little travel worn truly, and one of the ivory bars is cracked, and a brass rail bent, but the rest of it's sound enough. I expect to finish it on Friday. I expected to finish it on Friday, but on Friday, when the putting together was nearly done, I found that one of the nickel bars was exactly 1 inch too short, and this I had to get remade, so that the thing was not complete until this morning. It was at 10 o'clock today that the first of all time machines began its career. I gave it a last tap, tried all the screws again, put one more drop of oil on the quartz rod, and sat myself in the saddle. I suppose a suicide who holds a pistol to his skull feels much the same wonder at what will come next as I felt then. I took the starting lever in one hand and the stopping in the other, pressed the first and almost immediately the second. I seemed to reel. I felt a nightmare sensation of falling, and looking round, I saw the laboratory exactly as before. Had anything happened? For a moment, I suspected my intellect had tricked me. Then I noted the clock. A moment before, as it seemed, it had stood at a minute or so past 10. Now it was nearly half-past 3. I drew a breath, set my teeth, gripped the starting lever with both hands, and went off with a thud. The laboratory. The thing that worries about me, he's got a start and a stop lever. Does he have a go back lever? Because, I mean, like, Futurama has a one-way time machine joke in the show that I think is based off the design of this one. But, like, that seems like a really scary thing to just fling yourself into the future. I mean, obviously he comes back, so. I drew a breath, set my teeth, gripped the starting lever with both hands, and went off with a thud. The laboratory got hazy and went dark. Mrs. Watchett came in and walked, apparently without seeing me, towards the garden door. I suppose it took her a minute or so to traverse the place. Uh-oh, Zepster's here. Zepster, we're reading about time travel, man. I suppose it took her a minute or so to traverse the place, but to me, she seemed to shoot across the room like a rocket. I pressed the lever over to its extreme position. The night came like the turning out of a lamp, and in another moment came tomorrow. The laboratory grew faint and hazy, then fainter and even fainter. Tomorrow night came black, then day again, night again, day again, faster and faster still. An eddying murmur filled my ears, and a strange, dumb confusedness descended on my mind. I'm afraid I cannot convey the particular sensations of time traveling. They are excessively unpleasant. Isn't the name of the book the title of the stream? There is a feeling exactly like that one has upon a switchback, of a helpless headlong motion. I felt the same horrible anticipation, too, of an imminent smash. As I put on pace, night followed day like the flapping of a black wing. The dim suggestion of the laboratory seemed presently to fall away from me, and I saw the sun hopping swiftly across the sky. leaping in every minute, and every minute marking a day. I supposed the laboratory had been destroyed, and I had come into the open air. I had a dim impression of scaffolding, but I was already going too fast to be conscious of any moving things. The slowest snail that ever crawled dashed by too fast for me. The twinkling succession of darkness and light was excessively painful to the eyes. Then, in the intermittent darkness, I saw the moon spinning swiftly through her quarters from new to full, and had a faint glimpse of the circling stars. Presently, as I went on, still gaining velocity, the palpitations of night and day merged into one continuous grayness. The sky took on a wonderful deepness of blue, a splendid luminous color like that of early twilight. Does this guy wear a dress while time traveling? It makes the journey much more smooth. Uh, this is his first time, so he doesn't have the experience that somebody like you and I might have. First time, I mean, you can remember. Everybody remembers their first time traveling. Um, it's hard to forget. The jerking sun became a streak of fire, a brilliant arc in space, the moon a fainter fluctuating band, and I could see nothing of the stars, save now and then a brighter circle flickering in the blue. The landscape was misty and vague. I was still on the hillside upon which this house now stands, and the shoulder rose above me gray and dim. Oh yeah, bumpy ride that first trip for sure. Oh yeah, you it takes it's like driving stick. You're usually going through time a few times and lurching through time can be painful. I saw trees growing and changing like puffs of vapor. Now brown, now green, they grew, spread, shivered, and passed away. I saw huge buildings rise up, faint and fair, and pass like dreams. The whole surface of the earth seemed changed, melting and flowing under my eyes. The little hands upon the dial that registered my speed raced round faster and faster. Presently, I noted that this sun belt swayed up and down from solstice to solstice in a minute or less, and that consequently my pace was over a year a minute, and minute by minute the white snow flashed across the world and vanished, and was followed by the bright brief green of spring. No, this isn't new. This isn't a new mug. This is from Do You Understand Now, Zepster. The unpleasant sensations of the start were less poignant now. They merged at last into a kind of hysterical exhilaration. I remarked indeed a clumsy swaying of the machine, for which I was unable to account. But my mind was too confused to attend to it. So, with a kind of madness growing upon me, I flung myself into futurity. Futurity? Futurity? Crazy word. At first, I scarce thought of stopping, scarce thought of anything but these new sensations. But presently a fresh series of impressions grew up in my mind, a certain curiosity, and therewith a certain dread, until at last they took complete possession of me. What strange developments of humanity, what wonderful advances upon our rudimentary civilization, I thought, might not appear when I came to look nearly into the dim, elusive world that raced and fluctuated before my eyes. I saw great and splendid architecture rising about me, more massive than any buildings of our own time, and yet, as it seemed, built of glimmer and mist. I saw a richer green flow up the hillside and remain there without any wintry intermission. Even through the veil of my confusion, the earth seemed very fair, and so my mind came round to the business of stopping. Orior, Oriors, Oriors. Wow, fascinating. Welcome to the readery. Oriors. The particular risk lay in the possibility of my finding some substance in the space which I, or the machine, occupied. So long as I traveled at a high velocity through time, this scarcely mattered. I was, so to speak, attenuated, was slipping like a vapor through the inters- interstices interstices of intervening substances. But to come to a stop involved the jamming of myself, molecule by molecule, into whatever lay in my way, meant bringing my atoms into such intimate contact with those of the obstacle that a profound chemical reaction, possibly a far reaching explosion, would result, and blow myself and my apparatus out of all possible dimensions into the unknown. This possibility had occurred to me again and again while I was making the machine, but then I had cheerfully accepted it as an unavoidable risk. One of the risks a man has got to take. Now the risk was inevitable. I no longer saw it in the same cheerful light. The fact is that, insensibly, the absolute strangeness of everything, the sickly jarring and swaying of the machine, above all, the feeling of prolonged falling, had absolutely upset my nerve. I told myself that I could never stop, and with a gust of petulance I resolved to stop forthwith. Like an impatient fool, I lugged over the lever, and incontinently the thing went reeling over, and I was flung headlong through the air. There was the sound of a clap of thunder in my ears. I may have been stunned for a moment. A pitiless hail was hissing round me, and I was sitting on soft turf in front of the overset machine. Everything still seemed grey, but presently I remarked that the confusion in my ears was gone. I looked round me. I was on what seemed to be a little lawn in a garden, surrounded by rhododendron bushes, and noticed that their mauve and purple blossoms were drooping in a shower under the beating of the hailstones. The rebounding, dancing hail hung in a cloud over the machine, and drove along the ground like smoke. In a moment I was wet to the skin. Fine hospitality, said I, to a man who has travelled innumerable years to see you. Presently I thought what a fool I was to get wet. I stood up and looked round me. A colossal figure, carved apparently in some white stone, loomed indistinctly beyond the rhododendrons through the hazy downpour, but all else of the world was invisible. My sensations would be hard to describe. As the column of hail grew thinner, I saw the white figure more distinctly. It was very large, for a silver birch tree touched its shoulder. It was of marble, white marble, in shape something like a winged sphinx. But the wings, instead of being carried vertically at the sides, were spread so that it seemed to hover. The pedestal, it appeared to me, was of bronze, and was thick with verdigris. Changed that the face It chanced that the face was towards me. The sightless eyes seemed to watch me there. Oh, man. There was a faint shadow of a smile on its lips. It was greatly weather worn, and that imparted an unpleasant suggestion of disease. I stood looking at it for a little space, half a minute perhaps, or half an hour. It seemed to advance and to recede as the hail drove before it denser or thinner. At last I tore my eyes from it for a moment and saw that the hail curtain had worn threadbare, and that the sky was lightening with the promise of the sun. I looked up again at the crouching white shape, and the full temerity of my voyage came suddenly upon me. What might appear when the hazy curtain was altogether withdrawn? What might not have happened to men? What if cruelty had grown into a common passion? What if in this interval the race had lost its manliness and had developed into something inhuman, unsympathetic, and overwhelmingly powerful? I might seem so old world I might seem some old world savage animal, only the more dreadful and disgusting for our common likeness, a foul creature to be incontinently slain. Already I had other vast shapes, huge buildings with intricate parapets and tall columns, with a wooded hill side dimly creeping in upon me through the lessening storm. I was seized with a panic fear. I turned frantically to the time machine and strove hard to readjust it. As I did so, the shafts of the sun smote through the thunderstorm. The gray downpour was swept aside and vanished like the trailing garments of a ghost. Above me, in the intense blue of the summer sky, some faint brown shreds of clouds whirled into nothingness. The great buildings about me stood out clear and distinct, shining with the wet of the thunderstorm, and picked out in white by the unmelted hailstones piled along their courses. I felt naked in a strange world. I felt as perhaps a bird may feel in the clean air, knowing the hawk wings above and will swoop. My fear grew to frenzy. I took a breathing space, set my teeth, and again grappled fiercely, wrist and knee, with the machine. Gave under my desperate onset and turned over, and struck my chin violently. One hand on the saddle, the other on the lever, I stood panting heavily in attitude to mount again. But with this recovery of a prompt retreat, my courage recovered. I looked more curiously and less fearfully at this world of the remote future. In a circular opening, high up in the wall of the nearer house, I saw a group of figures clad in rich, soft robes. They had seen me, and their faces were directed towards me. Then I heard voices approaching me. Coming through the bushes by the white sphinx were the heads and shoulders of men running. One of these emerged in a pathway leading straight to the little lawn upon which I stood with my machine. He was a slight creature, perhaps 4 feet high, clad in a purple tunic girdled at the waist with a leather belt. Sandals or bushkins, I was not clearly distinguished which, were on his feet. His legs were bare to the knees, and his head was bare. Noticing that, I noticed for the first time how warm the air was. He struck me as being a very beautiful and graceful creature, but indescribably frail. His flushed face reminded me of the more beautiful kind of consumptive, that hectic beauty of which we used to hear so much. At the sight of him I suddenly regained confidence. I took my hands from the machine. What's uh what's that one game with the spaceship? Gradient? You're thinking of um Gradius? Gradius? Um, is it Gradius? The G thing. It's got me confused. Yeah, I know what you mean. The one where you collect power. Gradius. Um, Trying to think. Yeah, it's Gradius. Good game. I definitely recommend Gradius and Gradius 2 to anyone who hasn't played it. Um, Very fun games. Ooh. But yeah, I was only going to go for so long, and I think we'll leave his adventures in the future, the time traveler's adventures in the future, for next time. We're on chapter 4 of, what did I say, 20? Chapter 4 of 22 and an epilogue. But I did have some words I wanted to look up here. Now, when is the next stream? Mr. Beast, the next stream will probably be tomorrow, but there probably won't be a stream on Sunday. Now, I got a few words I wanted to look up here. Obviously, there's fecundity, but fecundity means fertility. Now, the one word, trammels. He used it in this sentence here. Our chairs being there was that luxurious after dinner atmosphere when thought roams gracefully free of the trammels of precision. That seems an interesting word. Trammels. Apparently, it means something impeding progress. So, trammels is another word for a pitfall. Remember this. Trammels. So, a trammel in my reading further is that I'm getting very hungry and stumbling over my words because of it. Not very hungry. Obviously, I can keep it going without eating for a while. Another word I noticed. There actually weren't as many. Was little go. Never understood what that one was. Little go. What does little go mean? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry for having punched my my mic. Now this seems correct because it is antiquated UK slang. Preliminary examination for a degree, apparently. Now the this was talking about learning Greek from Homer or Plato. And this is the sentence in which it's used, in which case they would certainly plow you for the little goes. The German scholars have improved Greek so much. Now I understand what that means. The test, you would not be succeeding, you would not be passing this test if you learned from these masters, because Greek has changed so much since the ancients, even the ancient Greek. Now here's a word I don't know. Deportment. The serious people who took him seriously never felt quite sure of his deportment. Deportment. So little go is pretty much a useless term as far as I can tell. It sounds pretty good. It sounds kind of cool. Deportment just means somebody's behavior or manners, apparently. Deportment is their conduct, essentially. Deportment. Interesting. So remember deportment, and for me, the two best words so far have been deportment and trammels. Now let's see. Was there another word, or am I done for tonight? I think that was it. My deportment. My deportment is wearying. Well, I suppose that's all I'm going to read of the Time Machine tonight. Not a super long stream today. Just wanted to get a little bit of a start into the Time Machine as a promise that I'm doing it. I guess I don't know how else to put it. Just really wanted to read a little bit of it, honestly, and now I'm not going to be doing that. So good night, good night. I love you. Good night.